Xian, a battle-hardened mercenary, adjusted his gear in front of a cracked mirror, the dim light casting shadows over his grim expression. It was another mission, another day in the war-torn world he inhabited. He wasn't nervous. He had faced countless enemies, but this one felt different. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The team had gathered intel, and the target was close. His body was tired, but his resolve never wavered. There was no time for hesitation. The job needed to be done, and nothing could stop him from finishing it. As he grabbed his rifle and walked out the door, a single thought filled his mind. This hunt would be the last. At a rundown diner on the edge of town, Xian met an old comrade, Tony. Tony, always the joker, greeted Xian with a half-smile. But the tension between them was undeniable. Xian sat down, his eyes cold as Tony spoke. "Old friend, you look like you need a break. How about dinner?" Tony offered, but Xian shook his head. "Not now," he replied sharply. The mission was far from over. They spoke in short sentences, both understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Tony reminded him, "Your payment won't come until the job's done." Xian's response was simple. He didn't do this for money. He did it for closure. Xian couldn't shake the images of Yo-Young and Tianai, his fallen comrades. The memory of their lifeless bodies, drenched in blood, was burned into his mind. Yo-Young's last breath, Tianai's final cry for help, it was all too much. Xian had been there when they fell. The pain of their loss was a constant reminder of why he had to finish this hunt. No matter the cost, he would complete the mission, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. The blood of his friends demanded retribution. As he prepared for the next phase of the mission, their faces lingered in his thoughts. He knew what had to be done, but the weight of it all pressed heavily on his chest. As the hours passed, Xian's resolve only hardened. He knew that Viper's forces were closing in, and he had no choice but to confront them head-on. His team had set up around the oil refinery, and they were ready for a fight. Xian stood in the shadows, his mind sharp, his instincts razor-edged. The night was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Every sound, every rustle of leaves could be an enemy lurking in the dark. The mission had become a race against time. Xian had no illusions about what he was facing. This was war, and in war, only the strongest survived. The countdown had begun. The enemy finally arrived. Engines roared in the distance, and Xian's team quickly fell into position. The sound of footsteps approaching grew louder, the tension thick in the air. Xian signaled to his men. "Hold your fire," he whispered into the radio. He was waiting for the perfect shot. The first enemy soldier walked right into their trap. Xian's finger hovered over the trigger, the weight of the moment settling in. He took a breath and fired. The first shot was clean. The mission had started, but it was only the beginning. More enemies approached. It was only a matter of time before the situation spiraled out of control. The battle erupted in a blur of gunfire and explosions. Xian moved like a shadow, his rifle steady in his hands, his aim true. He took down enemies one after another, each shot calculated, precise. But he knew the numbers were against him. The enemy was strong, and they were closing in. His team held their ground, but the battle was far from won. Xian kept moving, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Every moment felt like an eternity, but he had no choice but to push forward. He had to finish this, no matter the cost. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, the ground soaked with blood. After hours of fighting, Xian finally saw him, Viper, the man who had orchestrated the destruction of Xian's life. They locked eyes across the battlefield, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. There was no need for words. They both knew what was coming. Xian raised his rifle, his breath steady, despite the chaos around him. This was it, the final showdown. Viper smirked, but Xian wasn't fazed. He had come too far to turn back now. His finger tightened on the trigger, and the shot rang out. The bullet cut through the air, like a whisper of death. Time slowed as the bullet left Xian's rifle. His eyes never left Viper's, not even as he fell to the ground, blood staining the earth beneath him. Xian didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no sense of triumph. The job was done, but it had cost him everything. The sounds of the battle faded, replaced by the deafening silence of victory. Xian stood still, the weight of what he had just done settling in. The world around him was burning, but he couldn't afford to care. He had taken down Viper, but the price was steep. The man he once was gone, replaced by a shadow of his former self. With Viper's death, the rest of his forces scattered. The fight had been brutal, but Xian's team had emerged victorious. Yet there was no satisfaction in it. Xian walked through the ruins of the refinery, his body bruised and battered, but his mind clear. The mission was over, but the consequences of his actions would haunt him forever. His comrades were gone, and he had no place left in this world. As he walked away from the battlefield, Xian knew that he had no future. He was a man without a purpose, a soldier who had lived his life in the shadows. The hunt had ended, but Xian's own battle was just beginning. Tian received a call from China, an order to evacuate all Chinese personnel from the region. The situation had become too unstable, and it was no longer safe for anyone to stay. Xian didn't want to leave. He had lost too much already, but there was no room for hesitation. The call was clear. His team had to leave. Xian hesitated, staring at the ruins of his life around him. "I won't go," he muttered. But the decision wasn't his to make. He had to obey. As he packed his things, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his loss. Everything he had fought for had been destroyed. As Xian prepared to leave, he knew this was the last time he would ever see Xiao Yue, the woman who had always cared for him. She had been there through it all, his battles, his scars, his pain. But now it was time to say goodbye. "Promise me you won't cry when I leave," he told her. He couldn't bear to see her in pain. Xiao Yue's face was filled with sorrow, but she nodded. "I promise," she whispered. Xian turned away, his heart heavy. This was the final chapter in his story, and he knew that it was time for him to fade into the darkness. Xian boarded the helicopter that would take him back to China. As the aircraft rose into the air, he looked out at the battlefield below. The fire had died down, but the memories would never fade. Xian had done what he came to do. He had taken down the man responsible for everything, but now he was a man without a home, without a future. The life he had chosen had cost him everything, and there was nothing left but the echo of his past. As the helicopter disappeared into the horizon, Xian knew that he had left his old life behind. There was no turning back. Xian had never known a life free of violence, but the aftermath of this battle was heavier than anything he'd ever faced. The battlefield, once alive with the chaos of gunfire and explosions, was now eerily silent. His team members were wounded, some severely, and though they had won the day, it felt like a hollow victory. Xian moved among them, checking their status, giving orders, but his heart was heavy. He had won, but at what cost? The bodies of the fallen lay scattered. And even Viper's lifeless form couldn't bring him peace. He had avenged his friends, but the guilt gnawed at him. Every victory seemed like a defeat in disguise. After the battle, Xian returned to the old warehouse where Ouyang and Tianai had died. It was a place he had tried to forget, but there was no escaping the past. The walls, once stained with the blood of his comrades, were now quiet. The haunting memories flooded his mind. He stood in the center of the room, looking at the spot where they had fallen. For a brief moment, the weight of everything he had lost seemed to crush him. This was the price of the life he had chosen, a life filled with bloodshed and regret. Xian couldn't escape the feeling of emptiness that had followed him since Tianai's death. He knew he couldn't bring her back, but he felt an overwhelming need to visit her family. He made his way to their small house, a place filled with warmth and memories of happier times. Her parents greeted him with open arms, though they were unaware of the full extent of their daughter's life. Xian stood in silence as they spoke of her kindness, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. He felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He had promised to protect her, but in the end, he couldn't keep that promise. As the days passed, Xian's mind continued to wander. He met Tony once again in a secluded bar. Tony, ever the cynic, sat back in his chair, observing Xian's heavy demeanor. "You're carrying too much, old friend," Tony said, his voice low. "This world doesn't care about your regrets. It doesn't care about who you lost or what you've done. You can't change the past." Xian didn't respond. Tony's words were harsh, but they were the truth. There was no going back. But for the first time, Xian wondered if Tony was right. Could he move on? Could he leave the past behind? Xian tried to live with the weight of the past, but it never left him. He couldn't stop thinking about his fallen comrades. Their faces appeared to him in his dreams, their voices haunting him in his waking hours. Every mission, every fight, only seemed to bring him closer to the edge. The memories of Ouyang and Tian Ai were always with him, reminding him of the cost of the life he had chosen. As he sat alone in his room, he realized that no amount of bloodshed would ever fill the emptiness inside him. He had become a man defined by violence, and there was no escape from it. Despite the weight of his past, Xian couldn't stay away from the fight for long. A call came through from an old contact, a new job, a new mission. The target was another criminal mastermind, a ruthless warlord who had been terrorizing innocent civilians. Xian knew he had no choice. He couldn't stop now. The hunt was in his blood. But as he prepared for the mission, a part of him wondered whether he was doing this for justice or for the adrenaline. He had become a tool of destruction, and now once again, he would be sent to do the bidding of those in power. Xian arrived at the location of the new mission, a desolate town that had been torn apart by war. The target, the warlord, was holed up in a heavily guarded compound, surrounded by mercenaries and armed forces. Xian surveyed the area, his mind sharp as ever. He had done this countless times, but something felt different this time. There was a sense of finality in the air, as if this mission would be the last. He wasn't sure whether it was his exhaustion or the ghosts of the past that made him feel this way, but Xian knew he had to finish what he had started. There was no turning back now. Xian and his team moved in swiftly, each one executing their role with military precision. The compound was heavily guarded, but Xian knew their weaknesses. He had studied their movements, their routines, and their security measures. As the night wore on, Xian and his team infiltrated the compound, taking out sentries one by one. The tension was palpable as they moved deeper into enemy territory. Xian could feel the weight of every step, every breath. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for redemption. As Xian entered the warlord's inner sanctum, he came face to face with the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. The warlord stood tall, a smug smile on his face as he looked at Xian. "You're late," the warlord said. "I was hoping for more of a challenge." Xian's eyes narrowed as he raised his rifle. The air between them crackled with tension. This would be the final battle. There would be no more running, no more hiding. Xian knew what had to be done. The warlord was a monster, and Xian was the one who would end his reign of terror. The room exploded into chaos as the two men clashed. Gunfire rang out, and the walls shook with the force of the explosion. Xian moved quickly, taking cover as he returned fire. The warlord was strong, but Xian was faster. He had spent his entire life training for moments like this, and now it was all coming down to this final confrontation. Xian's heart raced as he fired shot after shot, each one bringing him closer to his goal. He couldn't afford to miss. This battle would determine his fate. With one final shot, Xian took down the warlord. The man fell to the ground, his body crumpling in a heap. Xian stood over him, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He had won. Yet the victory felt empty. The warlord was dead, but the war was far from over. Xian had killed one monster, but the world was full of them, and no matter how many he took down, it would never be enough to erase the past. The weight of his actions would never leave him. He was a killer. And that was all he would ever be. As Xian walked away from the battlefield, he knew that the hunt would never end. There would always be another target, another mission. The world would continue to turn, and Xian would continue to fight. But in his heart, he knew that redemption was a lie. He could never escape the darkness that had followed him for so long. The war had taken everything from him, his friends, his future, his humanity. All he had left was the hunt and the hollow victory of each kill. Xian returned to the small town where it all began. He walked through the streets, passing the familiar faces of those he had once known. The town was quiet, peaceful even. It was hard to believe that such a place could exist in a world filled with violence. Xian sat down at a small cafe, watching the people go about their lives. For a brief moment, he wondered if he could ever find peace. Could he ever escape the life he had chosen? Could he ever be free of the ghosts that haunted him? The answer was unclear, but for the first time in a long time, Xian felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for him to change. As the sun set over the horizon, Xian stood up from the cafe table. The weight of his past was still there, but for the first time, he felt like he could breathe. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to escape the violence of his past, but for now, he was free. Xian walked away from the cafe, his steps light, his heart uncertain but hopeful. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he would decide his own fate. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Xian felt like he had control over his own future.